Hey everybody! A few weeks ago we had a discussion on what we hoped to see from Zelda U at E3. Now that E3's over and we've seen everything from Breath of the Wild from the show, we thought it'd be fun to upload the discussion here on YouTube to see what came true and what didn't. So without further ado, please enjoy. Here we are at the Tea Table, the show's classic discussion segment where we share our long-form thoughts on a specific subject, whether it's recent news or something in Nintendo's past, something about the games, whatever it may be. Today, it is all about Zelda U. Our hopes, expectations, ideas, features we want to see. It's all pretty loosey-goosey, so we'll try to keep track of time as best we can, but otherwise, let's just dive right in. Does anyone want to start us off?
So, I think something that a lot of other people are most worried about in terms of Zelda transitioning to a modern open world format is that the game is going to boil down to you talk to someone, you get a waypoint on your map, and you go there. And that'll be all you do for the main quest, for the side quests, like everything. But what I hope happens is that Nintendo takes a leaf from their own book and looks at how they approached open-world exploration in past Zelda games, where it wasn't about marking things on your map as much. That would be a nice quality of life feature to make sure you know where you're going. But it was more about having interesting dungeons and caves to explore when you kind of find a place that you can go that you haven't been before. That'd be a good way to have hidden items in the overworld. Certainly more interesting than just bombing a wall and finding something behind it. If they decide to go the route of having tons of different equipment options, you could have interesting things at the end of each of these caves that would increase your skills, increase your stats, change up your fashion, change up your playstyle a little bit. So I think that would be a more rewarding structure than just saying, all right, we've got a quest log for you. Go follow it. Go complete all the little marks on the map so you can 100% the game. Like, that's not... I understand why open world games do that because it's very efficient and easy to keep track of, but it's just not that fun.
Mm-hmm. At least not for the structure of Zelda, I think. Because that really, I think it is important to have the story element in there. Even if Zelda's not ever been terribly strong on story, and that if story's not been a terribly emphasized element in a particular Zelda game, a lot of people do like the lore, they like the specific plot lines, and so I think in light of that, having just these waypoints that you're talking about would really sort of hurt the main story through line, I think.
Yeah, because it's discovering lore in past Zelda games has been more about just kind of going out on your own and seeing what you can find out. Mm-hmm. Whereas if it's structured in a series of quests, it's all very constructed, and you have to find out the lore in a very specific kind of way. And I think people are looking for a more freeform, less hand-holdy Zelda.
Yeah,
I kind of want to see elements of both. I really love Majora's Mask and all the character interactions and side quests and things like that. So I hope there are some structured missions, especially where you can sort of see your actions really affecting the characters.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there has to be, if they're going to have this huge open world, I think exploration has to be a huge key, and that means not having everything just marked on your map, not just constantly being point A to point B. And Alex, you said something earlier about items and things like that. Lots of hidden secrets, I think, is crucial. I would love for there to be optional items, optional weapons, just things hidden all over the place, where it's not, you have to go here to progress the story, but I want to explore, oh, hey, what's here? Oh, cool, I found this secret.
Yeah,
I want you to be able to discover all kinds of things that aren't even necessarily required to beat the game, but just that sort of give you that sense of immersion and that sense of adventure again.
Yeah.
That you're actually exploring for yourself and not just checking things off a list.
Yeah, like if you look at Twilight Princess, you get items like the spinner and the ball and chain, which I think the ball and chain, I know the spinner did, but they have benefits in the overworld. You can get like heart pieces and stuff like that. But they each have a specific boss fight or mini boss fight or what have you where you need that item to win. And, well, one of the criticisms of both of these items is that they basically used that boss fight and then did nothing else. But, I think items like that don't necessarily need to be doing much else. If they're not used in the boss fight in the first place, if they're only used as these optional, you can find them and explore the overworld even more, unlock these heart pieces and all that. Or you can go through the entire game without even knowing they exist. And I think items like that would be a lot better served as options rather than something that you get in one dungeon to beat the boss and then never use again. And I think that those items would be great used in that way. So I would love that. And Going back to your point about marking the map and, organizing all this information, I do think it's really important to have something like, well, the Bomber's Notebook in Majora's Mask was a really effective tool for managing all your side quests. I mean, I think it could have been done a lot better, but at least as far as Majora's Mask and the N64 was concerned, it did fine. But something that has a really big immersive overworld like this, and especially if, people have looked at this map and said it's going to take like an hour and a half to get from one point to the other or something like that. And if that entire map is really content rich in the way that we want it to be, you're going to lose track of everything you're doing ever. So you're going to need information like in your Bomber's Notebook, you get a profile on this character, you get the side quests that they have given you and you want to do, you get where this character is located. You're going to need information like these to remind you of sort of the progress on your side quests, and if you've not been interacting with this character or this side quest for a long time, you're going to need that information to remember how to even get back into the side quest without just finding it again. And if you have to find it again, sometimes, it might be easier just to start over, which you can't do. So you're going to need a lot of those kinds of not waypoints specifically.
Like a quality of life feature for keeping track of all this stuff that's going on.
Right.
Rather than the game being sort of demanding that you...
Rather than it showing you, do this, and this, it gives you the information that you need to do it, but it doesn't tell you necessarily to do it.
When you want the information, too, not just like...
Right, it doesn't shove it in your face. You have to access it, but you can access it easily.
Yeah, I'm down for that.
Is what I want.
I agree.
So on the subject of immersion, I'm also hoping that there are as few loading screens or sort of transitional areas as possible.
Oh, yeah.
Because, I think that kind of just sort of kills the organic, large, explorable overworld feel when, every few minutes the screen goes black and you gotta wait for a few seconds while it loads the next area.
Definitely.
And, I know that was just to be expected back in the day, but with this generation and with this much focus on an explorable world, I think having it be as seamless as possible would be really beneficial. And we talked earlier about how Nintendo claimed that Skyward Sword was going to have not really much of a divide between temples or dungeons and the overworld itself, and I didn't really feel that they executed that well. And I think they have a chance to actually do that correctly with Zelda U. And, I think it'd be really great to just, be able to explore like a large section of an overworld and come across some ruins and just continue exploring without the sort of obvious transition from, okay, you are no longer in the world, now you are in temple, go find item, go kill boss.
Yeah, and I think with a lot of other open world games, we've had a huge explosion in this kind of genre in the last couple of years, especially since Skyward Sword. And so I think they have a lot of other source material to look at and say, well, here's how we want to address this for Hyrule. And so to that extent, I think that we're going to be a lot happier with the overworld, the open world in Zelda U as far as loading times and whatnot go, because they just have so much more to look at and to be inspired by.
Going back and looking at the Game Awards footage, and I know the game's probably changed a lot since then, but you could already see kind of hints of how they're going to be managing this, where the wide open areas, they're wide open and they don't seem to have any real transitions or loading screens, but as they kind of approached the dungeon area where they were fighting the enemies, you could see the map kind of start to narrow a little bit.
Yeah.
So I think we'll start to see, as the areas get more complex and have more kind of design to them, they'll find ways to make sure that they don't need loading screens, because...
If they can naturally narrow it like that, that would be great.
Yeah. I do kind of worry that will sort of kill the point of the open world if they just end up creating a tunnel within the open world, and then it winds up being linear in a way after all. But that would at least be a good way to make things seamless.
Well, it won't necessarily be so linear. I mean, you guys know I'm playing Dark Souls 2 right now, and if you look at the way that world is designed, there are sort of these narrower pathways that can sometimes lead between different kinds of areas to explore. But a lot of them are designed in a way that kind of disguise the fact that they're narrow pathways to a different place. Like one, for example, is you go down a well, and that's sort of the gateway to the next dungeon. There's some other places too where it's covered in fog, so they don't draw as much. There are a lot of these ways that can go hand in hand with the way the world is designed to make it feel like it is a world you're exploring, but also, not require the game to be loading so much at a time.
Yeah.
So, I don't think those kinds of constraints necessarily have to limit how we feel the game is in an exploratory sense. I think that they can actually support it.
Yeah, you're right, because the sort of transition areas don't have to be internally linear.
Right.
It's just that they won't be as open, like spatially speaking, as the rest of it. So that, yeah, you're totally right.
And I don't think that necessarily makes it feel any more or less linear, because like if you look at like what Dark Souls does, a lot of these different places have access points in common areas. Mm-hmm. So it's not linear in the sense that you go from one area to the next to the next to the next, but it is linear, I guess, in the sense that the pathway from one area to another is a path rather than a big open world. But having a path to a different location, that's not a problem, I don't think.
Sure. Since you mentioned Dark Souls, one thing that I'm kind of curious about, and I don't have a real answer to this question, but I'm curious what you guys think is, so in Dark Souls, there's a very... The world design is very oppressive, but they sort of give you a moment of relief when you find a shortcut or a checkpoint or a bonfire. Mm-hmm. And Zelda hasn't really... Skyward Sword and Spirit Tracks kind of dabbled with the idea of shortcuts that let you get back to the spot you were in a dungeon if you die or something. Not like you're going to die, but, Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering how you think they'll approach the idea of, like, checkpoints in Zelda U, because if it's going to be more open, and if it's going to be an open field, I don't know how exactly that works. Is it going to be you respawn at your last visit a landmark when you die? Are you going to... I don't know how they're going to handle it.
The Miyazaki inspiration is going to go all the way, and you're going to ring a bell and summon Kiki to take you from place to place. In all seriousness, I don't know. I think the bonfire system in Dark Souls is actually really, really fantastic. And I think that the kinds of, like, the bird statues and stuff, like summoning Hilda in Link Between Worlds, which is what I was just referencing, those kinds of things don't really feel as natural.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I know, just sitting at a fire and being transported to a different fire doesn't really make sense. It's natural, but yeah, it's magic, so whatever. These other ways that Zelda has done it just feel kind of odd. It feels like they're trying to explain it too much.
Sure, yeah.
So I don't know how that's gonna work. I hope it's something more like the Dark Souls system where they don't explain it too much. They just, let you be absorbed in the magic of it, and the resting points can kind of take you from resting point to resting point. But who knows?
I'd kind of imagined the horse being kind of like your home base. But if you're gonna have combat on the horse, it doesn't really work to have the horse be the place you respawn at.
Right.
If you were just traveling somewhere on the horse and then you got off and then you explore on foot and that's where all the action took place, that'd be one thing. But you're going to be fighting on the horse as well.
Yeah.
So that goes out the window.
I mean, maybe towns like Castletown, Kakariko Village, Kokiri Forest, things like that could maybe...
They could have inns. That would actually be really, really cool. They haven't done that in a long time.
Inns, and I think they can have ways maybe in the town specifically, maybe it ties into like the mythology of Hyrule in this incarnation. There's some kind of divine presence in every town that makes them a safe haven, and through that divine presence you can sort of transport, like maybe that's where the bird statues come in. And I don't think it should be bird statues because we've already done that multiple times, but something like that where say that there is a statue of a goddess in each town, and it's like a little sort of gathering place for the townspeople to pay tribute to the goddess, pay their respects, pray, or whatever, and when Link goes, then you're able to sort of channel that divine presence and warp then from statue to statue, which gets you across the different towns.
Yeah, let's also, point out that the Zelda really does need to have a fast travel system. So,
yeah,
yes.
Definitely.
Yes. Absolutely.
No question. I mean, if Wind Waker had one, this one's definitely going to need one.
For sure. While we're talking about towns, though, what do you guys think about? I mean, it seems like this game obviously should have towns, so I don't think that's a question. But do we think that towns should function like RPG towns? Should they function kind of like they did in Ocarina of Time, where they're just kind of places where you find out information and maybe take on side quests?
I think it should be kind of a mix. I think the way that towns function in Zelda currently, I don't think they should abandon that. I think they need to keep the features that make Zelda unique. But I think that they could have more in the way of, like you're saying, inns, like RPG towns where there's sort of a story behind them. And they experiment with this in a lot of other towns throughout the series, but I think that they can really build a much better network in terms of how the towns are interconnected. Like if every town were kind of like Clock Town, but just for a different sort of branch of Hylian culture, like maybe there's the Ruto version and the Zora version, and the Goron version and the Kokiri version. You know, there are these different areas that are sort of the central hub of a different location or biome kind of Hyrule. I think that that could be really effective.
Yeah, something that I found was missing in both Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword, but more Skyward Sword, was that you didn't get a sense that there was a culture.
Yeah,
right.
Definitely.
There were ruins, but there wasn't a living culture. You would encounter an NPC every once in a while, but that was it.
And I felt like they built a culture, but especially with the robots, but then they just didn't show it at all.
Yeah, they were missing kind of the trappings they needed to really express it fully. They had breadcrumbs, but breadcrumbs are not enough.
And I think Ocarina of Time does that expression of a culture the best. And especially if, in the end credits when everyone comes together and everyone's dancing and partying, that's a lot of fun. But I think in terms of culture, they should definitely look to Ocarina of Time.
Yeah, and it's great because, like you said, Ocarina of Time, it introduced all these races and gave them all their unique areas, and now we have a chance to see that again, but in HD and just on a much, much, much bigger scale. They can do so much more with Wii U. They can flesh out those environments so much more and make them really distinct and individually interesting. So I'm really hoping to see that. It'd be nice if there's a little more human or Hylian settlements, if there's more signs of civilization in that regard. But I'm really interested in just exploring Hyrule and seeing the different ways that all the sentient races exist, because there's so many different races in Zelda, and they could do a lot with all of them with such a huge HD overworld like this.
Totally. Well, time's running short, so I think we should probably wind it down. Does anyone have any last comments they want to get in on Zelda U?
So Colin, you've been playing Dark Souls 2.
Yeah.
After playing that, how do you feel about how difficult Zelda should be?
I don't think it should be quite as difficult as Dark Souls. Well, maybe it should.
Well, sure.
It's been a long, long time since I've felt any sort of risk in playing Zelda. And I think that Zelda, especially in things like dungeons, and especially the later dungeons, I think there needs to be this sense of risk. There needs to be something at stake every time you try. And in Dark Souls, every time you die, you lose all the souls, which are essentially currency, that you collected. And you gain souls, for those who don't know, by defeating enemies. You gain their souls, and some will give you like 6... Stupid thing is on Do Not Disturb, and I don't know why it just rang. But you get souls, so like some enemies will give you 60 souls, some will give you like 400 souls. Every time you die, you lose all the souls you got. You can go back to where you died and pick them back up, but if you die on the way, that one disappears. The last one you had is what's left. So if you collect 40 souls on your way to go get your bounty of 4,000 souls, you're kind of screwed. So
it's just like Shovel Knight, but more punishing.
Well, yeah, Shovel Knight took it straight from Dark Souls. So in that sense, there is a really big risk every time you go out and do something in Dark Souls. And I really want Zelda to feel like that, not necessarily to the same extent, and not necessarily at the same difficulty level necessarily.
Sure.
But there just needs to be some sense that there's anything at all at stake. Because in Zelda, you keep all your rupees, you keep all your items, you just go back to like where you last saved. It's just the location. So I don't know. I don't know exactly how I want them to manage it, but Zelda definitely needs to be harder. I don't know how much harder, but harder. And every time you risk death, you need to be actually risking something besides just transportation.
I think the number one thing for me is it feels like in Zelda games now you can just mow down every enemy because you're so much more powerful than any of them are.
Definitely.
And the thing that impressed me most about Dark Souls is the enemies aren't quite on par with you because, of course, they do AI routines and stuff like that are pretty exploitable, but they do a decent amount of damage, and you really do have to keep up with your healing items and stuff like that. And
any enemy is a threat to kill you.
Right, an enemy could kill you if you
screw up.
Dispatch it quickly enough.
Yeah.
Whereas Zelda, they give you so few opportunities to screw up, and even if you do, the threat is so low that you can bounce right back. So I'd love to see more of that.
Agreed. Hello everybody, thank you for listening to this Nintendo Week clip, NWC. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to us here on YouTube for more highlights and discussion videos from Nintendo Week podcast, or subscribe to us